Hi, welcome to Divorce on Planet Earth, Kate Sharf's real world advice for well-intentioned humans, a show for anyone who has shared life, love, and intimacy. Today's episode, Discipline During Divorce, Part 1, Punishment versus Consequence. What's the difference and why should it matter to all parents? I'm your co-host, Jane Prelinger. Your host is Kate Sharf. Hey, Kate.
Hi, Jane.
Kate, parenting during divorce is often really confusing, as we know, and I think that questions around discipline are some of the toughest. I hear questions about this all the time from my clients who are going through a divorce. They know their kids are going through hard times, and they wonder, should I be more lenient because of the divorce, or should I just keep doing things the same old way? And then there are all those co-parenting challenges, of course. I hear questions like, should I try to coordinate discipline with my ex by having the same rules consistent across two households? Or what if my ex and I can't agree on important issues? Is it more important to present a united front, or should I set my own rules in my own home? And that's kind of really just for starters. There's a huge range of questions and quandaries that people face when they're raising kids in two homes.
Yeah, Jane, I think it's really hard and complicated. I mean, as you know, parenting is tough under the best of circumstances, and divorcing parents really want more than anything to support their children when they're going through this rough transition in a way that will minimize the kids' pain and sort of sense of things being destabilized. But how does one do that while still being a parent? You know, and being a parent sometimes means taking unpopular positions, doing things that our kids don't like, saying no. And then, you know, you layer in this problem that you're, as you say, you know, you're not at your best. You know, you're not thinking clearly, if very often, you know, depending on the kind of divorce you're having or where you are in the recovery period. Most of us have days where we really can't think. Our fuses are shorter. You know, we're more easily triggered. It's really hard to tell where our feelings end and the kids or anybody else's pick up.
Absolutely.
And they're linked to your ex and, you know, your feelings about your ex or whatever they are, and if they get activated. So I think it becomes a pretty complicated nest of issues. When, you know, you and I talked about it and decided to do an episode on discipline during divorce, at first I thought, well, okay, I'll just make a list of some of the more common thorny issues, some of the common mistakes I think that we all can get pulled into making when we're disciplining our kids during divorce. But as I was putting my thoughts together, I realized that each of those situations was really informed by my own ideas about discipline more generally. In other words, I found myself thinking, okay, in an ordinary situation, what would I be suggesting parents be thinking about? You know, what might be a good intervention
here. You mean in a non-divorce situation?
Right. Or, in a non-divorce situation, sort of what would be our sort of baseline thinking? Yes. Because we can't really talk about what to do under the pressure of divorce or how to maybe modify your response or not modify your response unless we know what a kind of good response would be.
Right. A baseline. Yes.
Right. Exactly. So I thought maybe what we should do, because we couldn't do all of that. We can't talk about discipline generally and then all of these contingencies related to divorce in one episode be overloaded. Yes. No one would listen. So we decided to break it up. So today we're just going to talk about the concept of discipline for kids at different ages under sort of ordinary circumstances. And there is really no ordinary circumstance. There's just maybe a non-crisis circumstance or a non-divorce crisis circumstance. And I know that there are a lot of ideas about parenting. There is not one right perspective. There's lots of good thinking, and I expect that I may say things today that some people may disagree with, may be upset by, may have other or better ideas about, and I think we would really love to hear those things. And send us an email, send us a tweet.
Okay, Kate, so let's get into it. What is discipline?
The way I think about it is that discipline has primarily two related purposes.
Okay.
The first and the most important one is to keep a child safe. It would be an intervention that would prevent them from causing injury either to themselves or to someone else, and I'm either emotionally or physically. We kind of have to start with that. That's the first thing any parent has to do. And then beyond that, it's to teach them something. To teach them something about how to understand their feelings or manage them, how to treat other people, how to be a good citizen of the world. Discipline is something we do that our kids probably will not appreciate for a long time, certainly not in the moment, in a conscious way. But discipline does make kids feel safer when well applied. Because we know from a lot of research and experience, if you have a kid or know a kid or wherever a kid, that even though as human beings we bristle against limits being imposed on us, we crave them. That limits and boundaries make us feel safe. They're our safety net. They're the thing that help us to know that even if we get angry, aggressive, creative, if we wander, a field, we're going to hit a wall that is soft.
Yeah. Kate, I'm so struck. I think when people hear the word discipline, their first reaction isn't essentially as positive as what you're saying. You're really talking about safety and learning. Safety and learning, which are two really very positive elements for a child.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think that's where parents get confused with this idea that discipline is something we do to upset a child. In other words, it's a form of negative reinforcement.
Right.
That, that you're hitting the behavior with a negative experience to extinguish the behavior. And really what I'm talking about is something very different. So I think that leads us kind of into the question of what is a punishment versus
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, tell us about punishment in your thinking.
So to my way of thinking, and I am very interested in whatever thoughts you have. To my way of thinking, punishment is a negative, uncomfortable, or maybe even painful experience that a parent imposes on a child to communicate the message, you have done something bad, or you've thought something bad. You have behaved badly in a way that I do not approve of. It doesn't fit with my worldview or my goals for you, or my expectations of you. And I'm imposing this punishment on you to teach you a lesson. And I'm going to withdraw the punishment. I'm going to take away this bad experience or this bad feeling when I think you've got the message. In other words, you're thinking right. That you've learned to think and to behave in the way that I want you to.
The way that I want you to. Kate, you used the word bad about 5 times in that description. It was very striking.
Yeah, I did that on purpose because I think that is the communication. Parents say all the time when they're punishing their kids, I'm not mad at you, I'm mad at the behavior. Yeah. But there is no difference in the experience of the child. Or, this hurts me more than it hurts you. These are words we say to our kids, but they're not authentic. Like they don't ring true to a child who's being punished. No, it hurts me more. Right? And I think what you're saying when you say to a child, this hurts me more than it hurts you, is even when you're saying, I'm upset about the behavior, not you, the other message, the implicit message is, your behavior hurts me. Yeah. I'm ashamed of you.
Yeah. Oh.
Or I'm disappointed in the person you are. I don't care if I'm just punishing the behavior. A child cannot separate those two things. But if you can communicate it in a way that a child will really feel the difference. I don't think punishment does really distinguish between those two. I think punishments are not effective teaching tools. And here's why. They are really essentially a form of retaliation. They often come out of anger. They're often imposed during moments of anger. And even when they're not, they typically don't follow logically from the infraction.
Give some examples.
Yeah. So an example would be sort of anything that is imposed that's reactionary or fraught or comes when a parent is out of control. That's one sort of thing. So one example might be a spanking. That's maybe the most sort of obvious example. There are plenty of people who think that corporal punishment is effective and a perfectly legitimate form of consequence or punishment. People, we could have a reasonable discussion about that, but I'm really talking about things that are impulsive and happening in a moment of anger.
Yes.
So that's one form of punishment. But it's really anything that is essentially vindictive or revenge-based or shaming. So, for example, if a child, a young child broke a sibling's toy, either through carelessness or on purpose, an example of a punishment, this is a pretty extreme example, but actually kind of disturbingly common, would be for a parent to break one of that child's toys or to take away something really, really important. Taking away something important for a short period of time with a calm discussion of why might make sense for a child, like an older child. But for a younger child who has less, and we'll talk more about development in a little bit, who has less control to break a toy or take a toy away when a child has done something impulsively or because they don't have the capacity to control themselves, feels vindictive. It feels retaliatory. And I have known parents to cut up security blankets. I mean, that's it, and you can sort of see where the impulse comes from. You broke your brother's favorite action figure. How do you like it? So a punishment really is kind of an attempt to put a child in a state of pain that is somehow supposed to mirror or give them the experience of some injury that they have inflicted either on a person or the world or on your sense of how they should behave.
So it's a very harsh way of trying to teach empathy that you're describing.
It doesn't teach empathy because it's not based in empathy. It's based in anxiety, right? It's based in the worry, a parent's worry that their kid is going to grow up to not know to say please and thank you, or to be polite, or to work hard, or to be kind. All important concerns. And usually these are parents trying to do their best and often, thinking really hard about it. So I'm saying these things not because I feel judgmental, but because I think they're important. It's important to think about this. The other thing about a punishment is it rarely fits the crime. I mentioned earlier it doesn't follow logically necessarily. And one of the reasons it doesn't is because the punishment is often too severe or just totally unrelated. If a child complains, for example, about taking out the trash, it may make sense for there to be some intervention, but taking his allowance away doesn't have anything to do with taking out the trash.
Kate, that's a really interesting point. I've never thought of it exactly that way.
Yeah. I mean, money and kids is a complicated question.
But are you saying that actually consequence gets lost as well?
Yeah. If a kid is complaining about taking out the trash, there could be a number of things. And first of all, you have to identify, what is the problem here? Is it the complaining? Is it the refusal to help generally? Is it that basically ignoring you? That's what they're doing? So it makes more sense to me, rather than taking away their allowance, and I have feelings about that. I don't think money, consequences or punishments related to money are a good idea. And the reason for that is they help kids develop really complicated and problematic relationships to money.
That's interesting.
But I think it would certainly make sense to say, take it out. If one more of those, and instead of alternating with your sister this week, you're going to be doing it every day. That kind of thing. The other problem with punishments is that parents run out of ideas really fast. There just aren't that many available to us. After you've taken away the electronics, the phone, you've grounded them, right? Whatever. I mean, what else is there to do? And then they just become kind of repetitive, and kids become inured to them. They don't care, or they kind of lose their hopefulness that they can ever get out of the doghouse. And then they develop a sort of an indifferent attitude toward the punishment, which might look like, fine, I'm going to be spending the rest of my life in my room anyway. No point in trying to change. Or I'm just going to get more sneaky. And that's the other thing about punishments, which is that they don't teach a child how to become better at whatever it is they need to learn, right? So a child who is, sassy and rude and, gives you a lot of mouth every time you ask him or her to take out the trash, depending on the age, may need to learn that, part of their job is to be a cooperative member of your family, and that they need to do that while still learning how to have a separate life. Let's say it's a preteen learning how to navigate a little more independence. So one way of doing that is by being, difficult at home and pushing you away. Another way of doing it is to not push you away and still learn how to manage the anxiety of moving out. So the task, obviously, is how to manage, for this child, is how to manage navigating this new moving away from being closer to you, to their parents, and more involved in a social world, and doing it without being a pain in the neck. But you need to help them learn that. So imposing a punishment, which just shames them, makes them angry. Let's say you ground them for a month and you do that over and over again, then they don't learn how to self-manage. They get angrier and angrier, or more and more hopeless, or more frustrated. And then what happens over time? What they learn is to not do the behavior in front of you. And they do that because they're afraid. They don't do it because they have learned a new skill or because they want your approval. They just don't want your punishment. So what typically happens is that they get sneakier. They get clever and they do the thing, whatever it is. And obviously I'm not talking about the dishwasher thing, but they're oppositional in other ways outside of your sight.
So you're saying, in a sense, there's exactly the effect that you don't want in many ways. Kate, this brings us back to your ideas, at least for me, about consequences then. To me, it seems fairly clear from what we're hearing that there is something more positive, more growth promoting about consequences that you're saying. So can you just talk a little more about that?
So a consequence is an outcome of a behavior that is a logical result of the child's behavior. And there are kind of anybody's behavior, but there are really two kinds. One is a natural consequence, and one is kind of a logical consequence. A natural consequence just happens. So if a child doesn't study for a test, they failed the test. And that, depending on that child, depending on the circumstances, might be enough, right? If it's fourth grader learning how to be a student and you've prepared him or her in the way that the school wants you to, or maybe the school wants you to hold back a little bit, but the kid is just not ready, hasn't cracked the code.
Yes.
Assuming no learning problem or other thing that you need to be paying attention to, maybe he or she needs to fail a test to learn that they really do need to study, or they really do need to learn to ask for help or something, that this really matters. Maybe they need to have that experience. So that's a natural consequence. Yes. You may not need to do anything. Yes. And sometimes you shouldn't, because then, it's adding kind of insult to injury. If they already feel bad, you're hoping that's enough. So one kind of rule of thumb is if you don't have to do anything, don't do it. But then there are these logical consequences. So for the same kid, let's say the kid who didn't do his homework and failed the test, but isn't upset about it and continues to do it, then there needs to be an intervention, and it should follow logically from the problem. So if the problem, but you need to understand what the problem is. Is the problem he just doesn't want to do it? He prefers to play video games. Or is the problem that he doesn't understand the work and he's afraid to ask for help? The first thing would try to get underneath sort of what is the problem. So maybe the consequence is, if it said, I'm afraid to ask for help, maybe the consequence is, I know it's hard for you, but you need to agree to go talk to your teacher on Thursday morning when we know she's going to be there. And you need to come back and tell me what kind of a plan you have for getting up to speed.
Yeah.
Or if it's not that, maybe the consequence is, until I see a couple of better days, there won't be any TV until I've seen that your homework is done.
Okay.
It logically follows.
That does logically follow. So, Kate, ultimately it sounds like you're saying that consequences are in place to help a child grow and basically let the child know that you have not withdrawn your love, that your love is there, but there are natural consequences to certain kinds of behaviors.
I think that's incredibly well put and very important.
Yeah.
I'm glad you added that. Nothing about the way you feel about your child has fundamentally changed.
Yeah. Kate, I think this leads us into one of the famous Divorce on Planet Earth lists.
Yeah, we like our
I think
lists.
we've got some. How about 11 things to keep in mind when imposing consequences? Let's start with number 1. Consequences should be prompt, predictable, and proportional. In other words, the 3 Ps of consequences.
Yeah, do you like that?
Yeah.
Little 3 Ps.
Yeah.
So prompt. Especially with young kids, the consequence should follow very quickly from the, let's say, infraction, right? Because if your kid is 4 and has, a temper tantrum in the grocery store and lies down on the floor and won't stop screaming over the sugar cereal, which is a nightmare we've all experienced, you're going to have to, in that moment, pick them up, throw them in the car. There's nothing you can do at that moment, but you need to say to them, as soon as we get home, you are having a timeout. If you get home and they're calm, like the point of a timeout is really a reset. If they're calm, they still have to go because we're getting into predictable in a moment. Follow through is crucial. Okay. Every time you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. Unless you've made a mistake and you've threatened to do something that's disproportionate that you really, in which case you're going to have to own that. But generally, if you tell your child you're going to your room when we get home, they have to go. Now, if they're little, if they're young and they're calm, it should be a very short time.
Okay. Yeah.
But it can't be after dinner, because after dinner is like next week to a toddler, right? Or a preschooler. With older kids, I would say it's different because it's very hard to know in a moment when you're activated, and older kids do activate us. They all can, but older kids are really good at it. If your teenager blows through curfew, you really might be a little stumped about what the appropriate consequence should be. And having that conversation at 3 a.m. or even at 8 a.m. when you've been up all night worried or just figured out that they're not actually even in their bed is a terrible time to tell them what the consequence is. But you should say, there will be one, and I'm going to think about it. Which, by the way, will make them really nervous, and that's okay.
Yes.
And then you need to let them know what it's going to be as soon as you can.
Kate, can I just flag something that is such an issue and a challenge for my clients, and I think was an issue for me when my kids were little, or even more recently, this idea of consistency. I just want to flag that idea that when you say you're going to do something, you really have to do it. It's part of the safety that we were talking about.
That's right. You have to do it. And as a part of that, you need to have clear expectations, right? That's I didn't say that, but I really probably should have led with that. Yeah. You can't have a predictable set of responses if you don't have clear expectations. So you need to be clear with your kids what your expectation is. You need to tell your 4-year-old, when we have dinner, you stay in your chair. You don't get up and run around. You don't ask for a different dinner. There isn't going to be a different dinner. Or maybe there'll be, in some families, like you can have Cheerios. Yeah. But I'm not going to make it, whatever your rule is. And then when they get up, maybe the first time you say, okay, if you do it again, then you're going to have a timeout. And then you really need to do it. Right. Every time. Yes. And if they do it again, you say, okay, if you do it again, dinner's over. You really have to make dinner over.
Yes.
And you have to get to a place where you can believe that you're not starving your child or being a bad parent.
Well, there you have it. Yes.
Because you really only have to take dinner away once or twice.
Yeah.
Unless there's a larger problem, right? So, yes, totally agree. You have to follow through predictably. And then your response needs to be proportional. If your child causes a little rainstorm in your house, don't come back at them with a tsunami, right?
Kate, that's such a great way of putting it, rainstorm versus tsunami, which leads for me naturally into number 2, into our dope list. That's Divorce on Planet Earth, for those who don't know.
Yes. Also sometimes an infraction.
Which is, number 2 here, stop any negative interaction before you get angry.
Oh, God, this is so hard. When your kid does something that worries you, scares you, makes you angry, like, of course you're activated by that. Like, you're going to have an internal reaction. But what I'm saying, stop it before you get really angry, what I mean is don't get into a power struggle with your child or a yelling match. You've already lost, and so have they. It takes practice, and you will never get it 100% right. But you know, we know our kids. We can see them amping up. We know it's coming.
Yeah.
So even, I think sometimes the easiest way to think about this is with younger kids. So if we go back to the child who keeps getting up at dinner, this is a pretty typical problem.
Yes.
You know, kids who get up from the table as soon as they're out of their high chair like a million times, and you're coaxing them back, and dinner takes an hour and everybody's beside themselves. What you need to do is you need to stop the behavior before you are saying, God, idiot, like, you know, like, get in your chair, or you're gonna be like, you're gonna go to bed right now, and it's like 4:30.
Right, before consequences change to punishment.
Yes, perfect. I had never put it together in that way, but that's exactly right. Before your reaction becomes retribution, and it's personal.
Right.
Like, you are so frustrated that it has become more about you than it has become about teaching. Like, you can't teach. Yes. And you're never going to win an argument with your kid, no matter how old they are. If your child is gone back past your limit once or twice, really, really impose that boundary. Okay, time out.
Yeah.
Okay, dinner's over. Do not get drawn in anymore. It is over. And can I just say a little thing about timeouts, by the way?
Oh, please.
My timeout soapbox. A timeout is not a punishment. A timeout is a hard reset, right? I hear from parents all the time, maybe you do, when I suggest timeouts for their kids, they'll say, well, they just go to the room and have fun. How does that help? I'm like, that's good. They like their room. They're going to calm down. They're going to get regulated. That is what you want. That is what you're trying to teach. They can come back. Well, how long do they stay in there? They can come back when they're ready to cooperate and or be nice. And if they can't, if they come back and it's another fail, they go right back in. And the other thing about timeouts is I know a lot of people don't like to send young children to their rooms or carry young children to their rooms. Yeah. But to ask a child to sit on the stairs where they can hear or see you, to me, doesn't do the job. Because they can barely sit there. And they can't calm down when the source of their upset is within earshot. I think to say, sit on the mat, go to your place. Like, I know it's popular and people do it. I just am not a fan. With older kids, it's very hard to get them to go.
Yes.
I mean, after they're, 8, 9, whatever, it's really hard to get them to go. Consider putting yourself in a timeout. Because the point is to get some distance so that both of you can calm down.
Kate, I just want to pause on that for a minute because I think that's so important. I think people do tend to think of time outs as a punishment often, as opposed to an opportunity for reset, as you said.
Yeah. It really is the way that kids begin to feel better about themselves and about you and diffuse this. What you want to do is learn how to diffuse situations so that the sort of baseline feeling in your house is one of calm.
That's so helpful to me, actually. I'm noticing on the list that number 3 is don't be a hypocrite. Say more, Kate.
Well, first of all, it's not possible to not be a hypocrite. But really, what I'm talking about here is if you are, and this is particularly true in divorce where parents are either in some version of a hot or cold war. They may not be yelling at each other, but they may not be speaking to each other. If you are displaying a behavior that is problematic, right? If you are fighting with your spouse, if you're, not paying attention, or if you're yelling at your child a lot, then it feels to me kind of ridiculously unfair to get mad at them for displaying those behaviors. And kids have a really finely tuned sense of hypocrisy and like unfairness. I think we forget, being a kid is really hard because you're essentially without power. Yeah. You have all these really strong feelings and ideas. And very often, I think kids feel that adults don't take them seriously because they're just kids. And they have maybe unrealistic ideas or feelings, or, they think they can do things that they can't do. They're just kids. But they really believe that, it's just they're full of feeling. And just learning how to manage those feelings. Yeah. So if you ask them to do something hard and you're not modeling a better way,
That's the old do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on to number 4. It's okay. Oh, here's an important one. It's okay to change your mind, or if you think you overreacted, to apologize.
Absolutely. I mean, this is true for kids of all ages. If you think that you said no to the second cookie because for whatever reason, you just felt like your kid had enough, or you just didn't feel like giving it. Yeah. And then they're upset about it, but not if they have a temper tantrum. If they have a temper tantrum, they don't get a cookie, no matter what. Yeah. They don't get it. You just can't reward that behavior. But if they cry and you think to yourself, I'm not really sure why I said no. Like, they haven't had sweets all day. There are all these, it's okay to say, you know what, honey, I think it actually would be okay. You're not being manipulated then. You're just sort of rethinking it. Similar, you can do it with an older child too. If you take away your child's phone because they talked back to you, and then later on you realize, well, they talked back to me because I was pretty disrespectful to them, or they talked back to me because they just came home from their other parents. It's a Sunday, it's a transition, and they're upset with me because we're getting divorced. You might say to them, you know what? I just overreacted. I'm sorry. I'm actually going to give you back the phone, but I think we need to figure out a better way to manage these transitions. And you're not showing weakness. You're showing strength.
Yes, that's a really important point. Your capacity to be straight with your child and admit you did something that you think was wrong.
Yeah, I think there are sort of a number of ways. So I've just described a couple kind of overreactions, but there are other ways that we sometimes get it wrong in figuring out what the consequence would be. And we need to own it. Like, there are a lot of times where we impose a consequence because we think the problem is one thing, but it turns out to be another thing. So, in the child we were talking about earlier who failed the test and wasn't doing his homework. So let's say we took away all electronics and said, you don't get them back until your homework's done. And he's still failing. Then we find out that the problem isn't that he's not doing the homework. The problem is that he has some undiagnosed learning disability. Yes. Yeah, well, we've driven another problem underground. That's a kind of a big example. We put the consequence in for the wrong thing and the wrong consequence. Sometimes we need to retool because we've created a different problem. Like, we may have it right, but we've created a different problem. So let's say the kid's not doing their homework. So we say, well, you have to go upstairs to your room and do your homework. And, you can come down and play Game Boy. Game Boy. I really dated myself. Maybe your child is upstairs, on their phone and not doing, you've created a different problem.
Yes.
So then you need to retool. The other thing we do a lot is impose consequences that are just not age appropriate. So a teenager, this is where, we're going to talk about this more in a minute, but a teenager really needs to sleep late whenever possible. It's biologically true. Right. So it may be very reasonable to ask your teenager to walk the dog, once or twice a day. But if you give your teenager the 6 a.m. walk, then it's just cruel and unusual.
Yes.
It just is. Oh, you don't want to do it either, but they really shouldn't have to do that. Do you know what I mean? And then another mistake we make is allowing these punishments to go on too long. I think less is more sometimes. So if the punishment is you can't go out, right? You're grounded, essentially.
Yeah.
One weekend may have more impact. Depending, maybe there's a big party that weekend or two.
Yes.
Than, a month. Because at a month, I alluded to this earlier, at a month, the child is so overwhelmed with the unfairness that they can develop a kind of defeatist attitude.
Great point.
They can sort of become hopeless that they can ever get, regain your trust. And they just sort of give up. The other thing is, if your child is already struggling to fit in socially and you ground them, then you're taking away an opportunity for growth. So
it's really important.
Right. There's more, but this sort of gives you the flavor of the range of ways that we could, well-intentioned parents can easily get it wrong.
Well, let me move on to number 5. If there are multiple transgressions, impose a consequence for the most serious one. Is that the same as pick your battles?
Yes. Pick your battles is very important. I remember when I had very young kids, realizing that the word no was very precious and I should keep it for the things I really cared about. Because if I used it a lot, it's lost its power. And that's true for consequences generally. There are just things that are probably worth letting go because you're teaching more important lessons at the, you want to focus on more important lessons. And that's a kind of everyday thing. The kind of being a little bit fussy about what they want to, like what if for a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old to say, I want to wear my tutu to school, every day this week, not these lovely outfits that grandma sent, might really upset you, but you might want to let that go. It's an age-appropriate request. At least they're clean if their clothes aren't, and there are bigger problems, bigger fish to fry around dinner time or bedtime or something. I'm also really talking about more serious situations. There are some families where you can just see it happen that there are little reactions for big problems and big reactions for small problems. When you're around it, it's very anxiety producing. So, for example, if your child is just out of control, like your 9th grader is out of control in a lot of worrisome ways. They're promiscuous and you think they might be having unprotected sex. You're suspicious that they're doing drugs. They seem depressed, or they're not going to class, or like anything really worrisome. And then they come home and they curse at you. And that's really triggering to you, the cursing. That's the thing. I would let the cursing go. It's not acceptable. And if that were the worst thing that were happening, I would say, there should be a consequence for that. But when everything is worrying, remember, this is about keeping safe first, right? And teaching. Go for the worst thing. Try to understand, because everything else is probably a symptom of that. So if you think your child is doing drugs, figure that out. Put in a consequence for that. If they're not going to class, figure that out. The cursing really doesn't matter in that context.
That's a really, really good point. There's sort of a triage aspect to this.
I think so.
Our next one, which I think is number 6. Oh, I like this one, Kate. Don't do something for your kid or give them something if you can't do it with a glad heart.
So this one really gets to the question of spoiling a child. A lot of people worry about, do I have a spoiled child? Is my ex spoiling my child? Am I going to spoil my child if I give him or her something or do something for him or her? If your child wants something and you're in a toy store and your child wants something and you can afford it and feel good about buying it for him or her, do it. Do it. But if there's some part of you that feels like, I don't feel good about this, try to dial in to yourself and figure out why. Because the chances are there's been some kind of interaction between you and your kid that needs attention and a consequence. And if you buy the toy, you're going to miss the opportunity and you're going to feel resentful. And then you're going to get angry and then you're going to feel guilty and then you're going to give them something else. If your kid is just surly one afternoon, just obstreperous and kind of sassy and difficult and, there's nothing to really do about it. Maybe because it doesn't really rise to the level and you're picking your battles, or maybe because you are aware that it's a transition day from the other parent. You want to be, understanding about that and maybe err on the side of softness for whatever reason. But then they want you to drive them somewhere, or they want to go to a party, or they want you to make them a special dinner, or they want you to buy them something. And you just don't feel like it because they haven't really sparked joy in you that day. You got a condo, that kid, right?
I was just gonna say,
you gotta get rid of them. No, I mean, I just don't think that's the day you do the extra thing, because that is what we call spoiling. When kids can wheedle and manipulate you into doing something for them that you don't really feel good about. That's what I would consider the definition of spoiling.
This is really helpful. I see. I just think this is a very useful definition of spoiling because people are confused about it. There's a lot of don't do this or you'll spoil the child. Don't do that. Well, sometimes it's absolutely appropriate to do that thing,
absolutely.
as you've said.
A spoiled child conveys a sense of entitlement.
Yes.
Right? But I know plenty of kids with lots of money and tons of toys who are very generous of spirit and don't have that acquisitive, needy, kind of driven to get to get
on
feeling.
some level, the quote-unquote spoiled child might be aware that the parent does not have a glad heart. That the heart is not glad. And how does that make them feel about themselves?
Great point.
Underneath.
Right. I think it teaches that they're kind of insatiable.
Yes.
And that they have the power to make you do something you don't want, so that you don't have the power to hold the limits. It makes them feel unsafe, and it makes them feel bad about themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. On to number 7, innocent until proven guilty.
So what I mean by this is that you should really try to give your child as much freedom as is reasonable to give them at a given age, even if you're a little worried, and take away the freedoms or impose the consequences when it makes sense to do that. So what do I mean by that? It does not mean that, you shouldn't impose a bedtime. It does not mean that you should let your 14-year-old have a girl-boy party when you're not home. It doesn't mean any of that, because you trust them. Yeah. But it does mean that you convey a sense of trust in your child, that you let them sort of be kind of on the edge of what you're comfortable with, but not beyond it, unless there's a problem, and then you dial it back. I had a high school freshman in my office the other day, and she was saying she has an older brother who's been very behaviorally problematic and taken up a lot of the bandwidth of the parents, and he's done a lot of scary things, and they've had to impose a lot of limits on him. But she hasn't displayed any of these behaviors. She hasn't run away from home. She hasn't lit things on fire. Yeah. But they're so frightened by their experience with the older kid that they track her comings and goings. I guess there's an app called, what is it? Something 360, Life 360 or something. Oh, yeah. So and a lot of parents do this.
Yes, I've heard about this.
They track their kids via the phone, their movements and all that. And she was just sort of feeling at a time where developmentally she wants more independence. She's sort of feeling like she's guilty before proven innocent, and she's kind of getting painted with the same brush as her brother, and really upset about it. I have never given my parents reason to worry. Yeah. I make good choices. I am not impulsive. Yeah. And I feel like they are, they're in my head. They're in my phone. They know wherever, and she's not allowed to have friends over when she's 15. Yes. She should be able to have friends over, I think, if, they're vetted friends, or during the day when her parents are here, or maybe go to other people's houses. And it just is making her nuts. I don't think her parents had any sense of sort of how she was being affected by this sense of being tried and convicted without having committed an offense. I completely understand why her parents were doing what they did, and we want to keep track of our children, but I'm not a big fan of these tracker things. Yeah, because people need children need an increasing sense of independence and some privacy. Yeah, just something to think about.
Yeah. Just an aside, this tracker thing really freaks me out. Of course, I've raised my children somewhat before the age of tracking, but there is something that really feels like major surveillance happening here.
It's sort of like, I would say, the 21st century version, but so much worse, of reading your kid's diary, or of going through their drawers, of trying to catch them in the act of something.
Or lying about where they've been, which I have seen in my practice. Someone saying to their kid, so where were you before? And the best piece is when the kid turns out to be at the ex's house, but is feeling too anxious to tell the other parent that they're at the ex's house. That's for another day.
Well, but you're raising a really good point. I mean, the question of how closely to track your kids, how closely to investigate them, and when, and what justifies it, what doesn't, is a big one we could talk about more. But in divorce, as you say, it's even more complicated, because very often they're hiding from you information that they think will hurt you, but isn't dangerous.
Exactly. I've seen that actually with a particular family a lot. Onward to 8, which seems to flow pretty naturally. Give them the opportunity to regain your trust when it's broken.
Right. So I've said this already a couple times. If a consequence goes on too long, kids lose hope and they stop trying. If your kid has done something that really has created a rupture in your trust, let's say they're doing really unsafe things online. Let's say they're sending, nude photographs of themselves and you're just freaked out and terrified appropriately, you have to impose pretty significant consequences that will involve tracking them. You have to keep them safe.
Yes.
If you don't, they're not safe. They may be furious at you, but they will feel safer in some part of their soul.
Yes.
But somehow there has to be a way back from that.
Yes.
This can't be the new normal, right? Because if they really can't change their behavior, okay, well, you have a different problem and you have to address it on a different level. But assuming it's an ordinary kid who's gotten into trouble, and a lot of kids do in this way because, with social media and stuff.
Sure.
There has to be a plan for how they can get their privacy back. And I don't know it depends on the situation, but they have to know what the expectations are, and they have to have benchmarks that they can actually meet without feeling like it's hopeless.
On these lines, and this one I find very interesting, and I wonder what our listeners would think about this. Number 9 on this list, don't insist on total transparency. Say more.
So this one, I think this one is a little controversial. I mean, have you ever worked with parents who have said to their children, we don't keep secrets?
Yeah.
Don't keep secrets from me. I want to know everything. Essentially everything that's on your mind. Or we don't have locked doors in our house because we don't have anything to hide. I think these parents are really trying to convey a sense that, we trust each other. Like, that's the conscious thing. Yeah. And there's nothing about me that I wouldn't be okay with you knowing, and I want to know everything about you, and I'll be accepting. But really what it is I'm afraid you're going to have a thought or a feeling or something, or you're going to lock me out or lock yourself in or do something in there. And I get it. Like, of course, there's a part of us that would love to, be able to control everything our kids think and do. But everybody needs privacy. Everybody needs a room of their own. Everybody needs a part of their mind.
Yes.
That they can think whatever. Right. Whatever. They can be angry. They can be outrageous. They can have fantasies. It's really different to feel or think something than to do it. Yeah. And kids whose parents say, you need to tell me everything, or you can tell me whatever you want, and push them to do it, feel invaded. They might actually deliver. Some kids are really compliant and they try, but nobody can stop themselves from having a really upsetting thought or feeling. And the feeling that, almost like your parents can see into your head is really, it creates all kinds of problems with self-esteem and development.
There's a big brother quality to it.
There's a big brother quality to it, and there's an invasive quality and a clingy, enmeshed quality, and it gets in the way of children's ordinary development, like the idea that they can stay connected to you and share things with you when it's important, but they can also have independent lives and be fine.
Right, which is actually the goal of parenting.
It's the goal of parenting. It's also the thing that sometimes is the hardest for us to accept.
Number 10, educate yourself so you don't overreact or underreact.
Well, okay. So first of all, there will be times where we overreact or underreact because parenting, in some ways, even without divorce, but especially during divorce, it's so difficult. Just kind of, you're just doing your best all the time, and you're trying to replicate the aspects of your parents' way of parenting you that you thought worked and you like, and then you're trying to correct for the others. And, we have we get triggered and we do overreact or underreact. All of us, I think I err on the side of probably softness, and typically in a couple, one person is a little more the disciplinarian and one person is a little more the nurturer, and it kind of balances out. And it's not across gender lines. It could be, it's not just moms who are nurturing. It's often, sometimes the moms are the enforcers. But when that goes well, it's a kind of a nice balance, especially if you're a single parent. Like, it just feels hard to hold both. Yes. And in divorce, often people get even more polarized. So there's that. That's one thing. Yes. But then the other thing is, when I say educate yourself, I mean read about child development, because you're not born knowing what is ordinary, normal, expectable behavior from a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, an 11-year-old, and what you should do about a behavior, or let's say the magnitude of the reaction really should take into account that child's capacity and what they're trying to learn. So a 3-year-old, a toddler, is trying to learn how to regulate their emotions. right? They feel all kinds of anger, and they feel frustration, and they feel all kinds of things. And they may say to you, I hate you. But what they're really upset about is that they can't tie their shoes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Or that they have to go to bed and they're like so tired
Yes.
they can't control themselves. It doesn't make any sense to punish that.
Yes.
Nobody likes it, but the right reaction is just to put them to bed or to say, I know, I'm sorry you can't tie your shoes, but we got to go to school anyway, right?
Yes.
Not a punishment
Yeah.
or a consequence particularly. Well, the consequence is, we're going to bed because clearly you're demonstrating that's what you need to do. On the other hand, when an 18-year-old says, I hate you, first thing you need to understand is why. They may have some pretty good reasons to be angry at you, but on the other hand, it's not really an okay way to talk to somebody. Yeah. So I'm just saying, try to understand that, toddlers are contrarians.
Yes. So developmentally, that's the story.
That's who they are.
Yes.
Preteens or, they are just trying to figure out who they are vis-a-vis you and in this social circle. And they're notoriously whiny and they lie professionally. Right? So it's not okay to lie. Right? You need to deal with it, but maybe not in the same way that you would if they were older.
Right.
Teenagers are trying to figure out how to move away from you, how to be separate from you. Yes. So they're famously disdainful.
Yes.
Right? It's no fun. It may need to be, addressed, but it's
a
not
developmental
personal.
Imperative. I mean, it's what happens.
Right.
Kate, all of this leads to, I think, to number 11, which has my favorite word in it, but let me read this to all of us. Start very early building a relationship of mutual trust and respect. Respect is my favorite word here. Say more.
You've probably had this experience where parents will come to you and they have high school kids who are conduct disorder, we like to call it. They're just trouble, and they cannot figure out how to help this kid not be in trouble, and they're always fighting. Like they're just always in a battle, and they want your help, and you sort of think to yourself, I don't know if I can help you. I wish you had come to me 15 years ago, right? It's not that you can't help, but it's so hard at that point. I don't know if you remember, I so clearly remember the moment with my older kid where I realized that she was too big for me to pick her up and put her anywhere, that I had really no actual control.
Yes.
I had nothing at my disposal except something more powerful than my ability to pick her up and put her in a room. I had a certain quality of relationship. The only real power that we ever have over our kids, once they're, we can't create a physical boundary, is what comes out of a mutually respectful and trusting relationship. So it's their desire to maintain the respect we have for them and our approval. Here's a little anecdote. I am far from a perfect parent, and my children, they know I love them, but they know they're far from perfect. But I had a friend come over to my house when my kids were, I don't know, like, let's say 6 and 9. And she had kids about the same age, and she was kind of off and trying to figure out how to get them to behave. And my kids were just bickering. They were being difficult. We couldn't have an adult conversation. They were unnecessarily being just kind of generally pains in the neck. And I said to them both, hey, up to your room. Like, it was just, I didn't really even think about it. I just needed them to be gone, reset, and come back. And they just went. And she was amazed. And again, I just want to say they didn't always, but this was a moment where they did. And she said, how did you do that? Yeah. I said, I don't know. But there is a kind of invisible wall in a family that's working well that kids will not push past. Yes. Not because they know what they're afraid of, but because they know whatever's on the other side of that wall, I don't want to know. Yes. I just am not going there. And I'm not going to refuse because I don't know what happens. We just don't do that in this family. There was no question. They just went. It wasn't a frat moment. I mean, we had those. But what I'm saying is that is the power of the relationship. Yes. That's what made them go. And also the knowledge that there wasn't going to be anything really bad that happened other than that. So it's their desire for our respect and approval. It's also their worry that you might be actually right. That as much as they will tell you don't know what you're talking about, I can smoke this amount and still drive. I know that I'm fine. I can smoke this amount of marijuana and still be fine. You idiot.
Yeah.
You know, and you say, well, I really don't care. Maybe you're clearly a better judge of this than I am, but you're not driving after you've been, whatever it is.
Yes.
Adolescence is terrifying. You kind of cross your fingers. You just hope they make it. Right?
Yeah.
But one of the most powerful tool you have is that little voice in their head that says, maybe she's right.
Yeah.
Maybe the natural consequence of my doing what she thinks is a bad idea is the risk I don't want to take.
Yes.
And then the last thing I'll say is that one of the most important tools we have is their trust that if they screw up, even if it's an area that they know is going to upset us, that they can come to us. If they're in over their heads and frightened, or they feel out of control, that they can come to us and talk about it, and that the first thing we will do is listen and empathize.
Yes.
Maybe there will be a consequence, maybe there won't, but that is what we're leading with.
Yeah. Yeah. Kate, those are such important words. And again, I want to say these are kids, ideally, who know that ultimately we respect them and have their best interests at heart. That our consequences are really in their best interests. This is really important stuff. Thank you so much. And to all of you, thanks for listening to Divorce on Planet Earth, Kate Scharf's real world advice for well-intentioned humans. We invite you to subscribe to us on iTunes, that's Apple Podcasts, or if you're not an Apple person, you can find us on Spotify or through our blog. And please follow us on Twitter at Divorce for Humans, that's Divorce, 4, Humans. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a future podcast, you can reach us through our blog at info@divorceonplanetearth.com. We'd love to hear from you. We hope that what you hear on this show will be helpful, but since everyone's situation is different, it is not intended as a substitute for clinical advice or recommendations. See you next time.